Greetings and welcome to Flanagan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanagan, and today we're going to be talking about the benefits of distributed solar generation with Bernadette Del Chiaro. She's just taken a new job as the Senior Vice President of the Environmental Working Group. Prior to that, and for almost 12 years, she served as the Executive Director of the California Solar and Storage Association, known as CALSA. She's been called the brains behind California's solar defense. Happy to have Bernadette on the podcast today. Bernadette, welcome to the podcast. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And where are you sitting as we speak?
I'm sitting in Sacramento, California, about a mile and a half from the state capital.
Yeah, that's great. And I take it you've been living in Sacramento for quite a while.
I've now lived in Sacramento more than any other place. Moved here in 2002, so it's been 23 years?
Yeah.
And yeah, a long time. I moved here specifically to work on California policy because I decided that would be my way of making the biggest change and difference in the world. And, I've put down roots. So we'll see what happens when the kids grow up and move out of the house. But for now, I'm thrilled to have, to be able to live and work in the fourth largest economy in the world now and make change happen at our state house.
Well, and thank you for moving there, and more importantly, thank you for moving there and working on solar policy and environmental policy. I've introduced you already, and I've introduced you as the Senior Vice President of the Environmental Working Group, which is a brand new job for you. Can you tell me what your charge is there?
Yeah, and it's Senior Vice President of California, because there are other Senior Vice Presidents at my organization, but they have different roles. So I'm a month in to a new job, and I am thrilled to be with this new team. The organization is the Environmental Working Group. It's been around for 30 years, more than 30 years now. And they just do brilliant work focusing on sort of healthy living is really kind of like the best way to describe it. So how to, how healthy is the food you're eating? Yep. How healthy are the products you're buying for your family? Whether that's sunscreen or cosmetics or cleaning products for your home. How healthy are the other things that you might buy and put in your home and really make a difference in your life? Like, what do you sleep on? That kind of thing. And then inclusive of how healthy is the way in which we grow food? How healthy is our energy supply that powers our homes? It's just really kind of touching where consumers really interact with the environment, giving consumers the tools they need to protect themselves and their family, and then encouraging them to be active in public policy as well, so that we get our government working for us, we the people, and making sure that our environment and our food and everything around us is safe and clean and healthy. So it's a really great organization, and I'm thrilled to be able to come in and work to build up a very strong California presence. They've been active in California for a few years, but my job is to build it up even further and expand the work we do. So it's really fun to be doing this now.
A good friend of mine worked for EWG and on food issues, and so this really explains to me the focus. But how has your job shifted from what you were doing at CALSA? I've already mentioned that you were at CALSA for almost a dozen years, directing, distributed solar policy in California, or advocating for. So how is your job different now, this new gig?
Well, first of all, I have not left the fight for rooftop solar in particular. I am still very involved, very active through Environmental Working Group. They've been a coalition partner of ours for quite some time. So that part has been seamless. And I just have expanded the portfolio and sort of differentiated my approach, I think, to the issue is the best way to explain it. So my work now in California is part energy, really focused on rooftop solar. But then also I do work on, like I said, clean foods, toxics. We've got a couple interesting bills we're sponsoring that I'd be happy to talk about if you're interested. And then of course the platform now upon which I stand is different than speaking and working from the vantage point of the industry. So I now am back to advocating from a public interest platform. So just a broad third party interest in solar energy, an interest coming from the public's perspective, which I think is needed. We need a stronger voice, I think, in the public interest sector of fighting for rooftop solar alongside our friends and our absolutely needed business partners. We can't build a clean energy future without a healthy industry to build and design and maintain our clean energy infrastructure. But from Environmental Working Group now, I can work alongside industry, but speak with a very strong voice from the public interest perspective.
Sounds kind of refreshing.
It's just, it is. I mean, change is always good. 12 years is a good amount of time. Not that I was ever counting, but honestly, I have to tell you, Ted, I think it'll be hard to top working with Kelsa. It really was a dream job. It was really the best job I've ever had so far. We'll see if EWG tops it, but it was a great job, incredible people, and just an honor to get to understand, honestly, the business perspective. I think not enough people in the sort of advocacy community really ever understand where businesses are coming from. And so it's really it was really an honor, and just the best people, just such good hearts in that industry, and people like yourself who have just dedicated your life, same as I've dedicated my life through sort of advocacy and public policy, but to dedicate it in such a concrete and tangible way as, every single minute of every day, you're actually building something that is so tangibly good for our planet and for the public. It was great. So I do miss it already, but it is nice to speak again from this place of what is the right thing for the public at large. Yeah. And it is just so needed. We just don't have enough strong voices, and there's such confusion out there coming from some folks in the public, environmental space that I think having some strong voices in the environmental movement is really needed. So it's nice to be able to do that.
Right. And of course, it must have been a major blow to CalSA that you took off. You were such an incredibly good spokesperson for that trade association. But I just ran into you at a CalSA event, it was a couple of weeks ago. So you haven't gone too far from the field.
That's right. Well, you're very kind. I think CalSA will benefit from the change, as everybody does. And Brad Hevner, my longtime policy director, is now taking over as the executive director of CalSA, and the rest of the team stayed. So CalSA is in great hands. And I like to say you guys got basically 2 for 1, because CalSA stayed strong, and you now get me with a new organization and bringing a new army to the battlefield. And yes, the event we saw each other at, and hopefully we get a chance to talk about this bill we're fighting, was a coalition event, and a great example of how we can add to the industry's fight for their customers. And join that fight on behalf of all of us who care about having clean air and clean water and clean energy.
And that was Assembly Bill, was it 942? And I see that the legislature or some committee really gutted that bill, which was really an attack on net energy metering, and what was it, reducing the period of time that we have net. That was taken out of the bill. I guess still in the bill is that if you sell your house, the new owner does not have the advantage of net energy metering. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's still a really bad bill, and we have to kill it. That bill needs to not go any further. And we can talk about that if you want. But yes, in a nutshell, we and our coalition allies, the Solar Rights Alliance, CALSA, of course, groups like Environment California, as well as Environmental Working Group, and many, many, many others rallied together to fight that bill in its first committee in the Assembly. Bills all get heard through a policy committee, and that's the first place to
Yeah.
really debate the merits. And so we worked really hard. They had to scrape big, borrow steel to get that bill through. And even with that, they did take a massive haircut. They did
Yeah.
amend out. There were two places that bill proposes to break contracts on 2 million solar customers and solar users. Kind of an unconscionable thing for
Yeah.
any legitimate policymaker to even propose.
Yeah.
And the first was at the 10-year mark, down from the state protected 20-year guarantee. And then the second is, as you said, when you sell your home. They took out the 10-year, but left in the sale at the
Yeah.
sale of the home, as if that's not still breaking the contract. It's in
Yeah.
writing and
Yeah.
every interconnection agreement that this net metering system stays with the property. So if you sell your home, it goes on and passes on to the next homeowner. And
Yeah.
that's essential for consumer protection. If you
Yeah.
think about it, majority of consumers finance their solar system, and the financing terms are locked in for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're locked in based on the economics of the net metering vintage that they got. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be burdening home sellers, they'll have to buy out their financing before selling a home. Many of us do not. When we go to sell a home, we do not have tens of thousands of dollars, just cash, liquid, ready to go, to buy out a liability like this. And the reason why we finance it is because we don't have that kind of money sitting around in the bank. So this is going to be a major burden on home sales and home sellers, particularly hitting middle and working class families, which of course make up 60% of the solar market in California. And then, or worst case is the home is sold to a buyer and it's not disclosed, and they take on the liability and they're immediately underwater because the system will be less valuable
Yeah.
than it was under the previous tariff. Yet the liability, the monthly payments on that financing will remain the same.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's a huge consumer protection problem that we have in the works if the legislature doesn't just kill this bill outright. But we're working
Yeah.
hard, and hopefully we will be able to kill it in the next step.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about the fight that's been going on for years. I mentioned that on prior podcasts we've talked about net energy metering, which is sort of went from net energy metering version 1 to net energy metering 2.0, and then we ended up with something called net billing that grotesquely limits the value when you're sending excess power to the grid. Can you just lay out some of the effects that has had on the solar industry? It's been really, really tough.
It has. Yeah. So in 2022, the Newsom administration adopted this third version of the tariff, as you described, and it slashed the value of exported energy, the value that you get when you send energy back to the grid, by 80%, and about halved the value of the solar system. And that went into effect in April of 2023. So a few months later, there was a huge surge leading up to that deadline. A lot of customers said, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go solar now and get in under the new deadline." And then there was just this cliff, and the market
Yeah.
almost basically came to a standstill. And it has been slowly ticking back up, but mostly has now flatlined. And we're about 60% below where we were before the surge. And it has set us back by many, many, many years. We've been trying in California to build a clean energy future, get to 100% clean energy, electrify and decarbonize our cars and our buildings. this is the vision. This is the beacon of hope that we hold out for the world, frankly, as an example. And through this policy, we have really set ourselves back. And as a result of that market slowdown, of course, the impact on business has been monumental. We've seen major companies go bankrupt. We've seen, we estimate about 17,000 people lost their job. And these were good jobs. These were solar jobs. These were mostly installation jobs, people trained on the skill of installing and building rooftop solar. And I'm afraid we haven't seen the end of it. We'll, we're all crossing our fingers and hoping for the best, that this industry gets off the ground, that batteries get off the ground along with solar, and we get to taking back off again. But unfortunately, there's a lot of headwinds, right? Macroeconomic, national, international dynamics that are adding and increasing prices on everything, including solar and batteries. So this decision by the Newsom administration, pushed by the investor-owned utilities, couldn't have come at a worse time from both a planetary, point of view, but also from a business and economics point of view. And it's really unfortunate.
So, it's been called a dark time in the California solar space. It's certainly a big step backwards. But as you have said before, we still have one of the largest solar markets in the United States.
It's true. We do. It's hard to put a lot of get excited about that statistic because we are, of course, the largest state in the country, and so we should have the largest market by far. We are also one of the more technology friendly, early adopting states, and we have some of the highest need for solar energy anywhere in the country. So we should be the highest. So it's not a great consolation prize to still hold that title, but it is important to know so that people don't become too depressed that we are still building, people are still going solar. It's really important that you add a battery now to your solar system to really retain all of the value of the sunlight that falls on your roof. And batteries, of course, bring ancillary benefits besides retaining the financial value, right? They if they're wired correctly and set up correctly, they can keep the lights on when the grid goes down, and they bring, of course, many benefits to the grid itself. So it's a good thing that people are investing in batteries more now. But they do add to the cost. So a lot of people can't quite afford it, and that's why the market is so sluggish.
Yeah. Now I think you said a few minutes ago that there's about 2 million solar rooftops in California. Is that right?
That's right. We have hit the 2 million mark, and that is everything from single family homes to apartment buildings, parking lot solar, the large warehouses, farms, schools, you name it. Anybody with a plot of land and a need for electricity right there on site is investing in going solar. And, some of my favorite stereotype breaking facts about how this market has developed. Who are those 2 million consumers? It is, I think, surprising to a lot of people that I mentioned earlier. About 60% of California's solar users today are low and middle class. About over 50% are families of color. There's 5 times more solar roofs in Fresno than San Francisco. You can say the same thing about Inland Empire versus Santa Monica. We have and solar is embraced by Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike, and even shares. So it's an amazingly diverse market, and diverse in every way, rich and poor, inland and coastal, everything that you can imagine. And it makes so much sense. Everybody loves solar energy. Everybody loves it. It makes sense. It saves everybody money. And it's just something real and tangible and concrete. And unfortunately, of course, this bill we talked about earlier really upends people's trust and would upend in people's trust and faith in that investment,
Yeah.
which is why it's so important that that bill is defeated. But for the most part, it's a real thing that you can do to make, to protect your family, protect your own finances, and do right by the planet.
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that peak demand in the state of California has gone down largely as a result of this solar revolution, right?
It's an amazing, yes. This is Dr. Richard McCann, an economist. He did an article that I stumbled upon last summer on his blog, where he showed that yes, peak demand in California has actually basically remained flat for 20 years, and despite population growth, economic growth, increased use in electronic gadgets,
Yeah.
and increased temperatures, we have kept peak demand flat in California for 20 years, defying the California Energy Commission's estimates, right? The expectation was that peak demand would have grown by about 15 to 16 gigawatts, or 15 to 16,000 megawatts. We would have higher demand on our peak grid today. And instead it's below that. It's exactly 15 to 16 below what they expected. And interestingly, and not surprisingly, really, when you think about it, that's exactly how much rooftop solar we have installed in California. So the correlation is 1 to 1, and it makes sense. We've been building individual investments in solar energy has basically kept up with increased demand. And that has saved all ratepayers. Dr. Richard McCann estimates $1.5 billion just in 2024 alone, because it means the utilities didn't have to go out and build 16 gigawatts worth of new resources and power lines to bring those new resources into our cities. It's a
Right.
massive, massive accomplishment. Unfortunately, utilities, being competitive and protective of their profits, they're trying to say the opposite story, but the facts are pretty indisputable.
They certainly are. And of course, energy efficiency ties right in there. And our good friend Art Rosenfeld would call these, what we said, 32 Rosenfelds worth of capacity has been saved from solar and efficiency. Now, the utilities have made the argument that why should they subsidize wealthy people that invest in their own solar? You've already said that that's not really the case, but
Yeah.
why should they subsidize distributed solar resources when you can build solar out in the desert for a fraction of that cost? And I think you're going to tell me that, that's been a pretty successful argument for them, right? They've been able to say that's the least cost resource. But on the other hand, you just mentioned power lines. These utilities are spending a ton of money on power lines, and they don't talk about the cost of the power lines, do they?
No, they do not. Yeah, there's so many things to unpack there. But they have really pushed this idea that utility scale solar and wind is cheaper than distributed
Yeah.
rooftop solar. Um, and they get away with that because, of course, there is an economy of scale when you build 500 megawatts on one piece of land out in the desert. That price per unit to build it is cheaper than if you're building a million different little systems and climbing up on the roof and interacting with a million different customers, right? There is an economy of scale. Nobody is debating that. But the thing that you point out, which is the right thing to point out, is that just building it out in the desert is not the end result. That's not the last cost. You have to then deliver it. And these transmission lines, both the transmission and the distribution system, the substations and all the different lines in the distribution system, they make up actually the bulk of the cost of retail electricity. If you break down a utility bill, the majority of our dollars on every bill that we pay goes to the distribution and the transmission system. And that's just to build it and maintain it. That's to say nothing of the cost to all of us that is almost hard to even quantify, of when those transmission lines or distribution lines is more common,
Mhm.
spark wildfires or break and shut down in high wind events, and we are all sent out into the dark. So this transmission and distribution system is really vulnerable, and it's especially vulnerable in this as we head into more extreme weather. So for us to keep investing in a bigger and bigger grid and expanding that grid and building resources further and further away from where we live, it's a recipe for continued cost increases, and it's a recipe for a continued unreliable electric grid. Even if there are renewables bolted on to
Yeah.
that, it's not really progress for our communities and for our pocketbooks.
And we're
And they never
seeing
talk about this.
we're seeing crazy rate increases right now.
We have seen crazy rate increases for 20 years, right? I mean, when I first started advocating for rooftop solar in 2003, California had just come off of the electricity crisis. Electricity prices had gone through the roof. People were in shock, right? And the legislature said, "Hey, let's diversify. This doesn't make sense to put all our eggs in one basket with a handful of companies that can manipulate our energy supply. So let's diversify and let's incentivize people investing their own money in distributed resources, because nobody can control the sun." That was the main idea of the Million Solar Roofs initiative that was ultimately passed in 2006. And what the wind under the sails of solar back then was a combination of the government incentives. We had a rebate, a true subsidy. We had net metering, which is more
Mhm.
of an incentive. But really, people knew that rates had been going up and were going up, and electricity was expensive in California. That has been our story nonstop. And of course, it's only, starting to like hockey stick up these last few years, as frankly, the utilities strive to recover profits from their bankruptcies. That's really the correlation here. They like to say that it's wildfires and rooftop solar that are driving rates up. There's nothing that justifies those two claims. Both rooftop solar saves everybody money and helps keep rates down by keeping costs down, but wildfires only account for about 12% of the spending that utilities have been getting permission from the government to spend of our dollars. It's not really wildfires that are causing these rates increases. It's unchecked spending on T&D, transmission and distribution, and that's where they get their profits, and they just record profits year after year.
So we may end up with the situation where there's sort of a fork in the road. One fork is we have an integrated grid, which factors in all these distributed solar and now storage assets that are good for everybody, not just the individual investors. And then this notion of grid defection. If those rates just keep cranking up higher and higher, people are going to say, "Wait a second, I don't need that utility." And then, of course, the utilities go into a death spiral, right? And things just the pace of that change, or the pace of that penalty, just accelerates, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a third prong to the fork, and that is the prong that the utilities are trying to push California down. And that is one in which distributed generation, self consumption, self generation is not an option. That we tax it to death, that we penalize it, that we scare consumers by giving them a bad experience by design. And we are only in this large utility scale world, but we can't actually meet our climate goals because we
Yeah.
can't build this stuff fast enough. California can't really build the transmission and the distribution system fast enough to meet our growing energy needs. And it's like we're in la la land pretending that somehow that's going to change. It's a systemic problem in this state. It is not limited to energy, and we need to really wake up and realize that the better option is, yes, let's keep building some of those resources as quick as we can, but let's be realistic here. Let's incentivize consumers to use their own private money to build what is ultimately a shared infrastructure. That second prong that or maybe the first one you envisioned. But right now we're on the polar opposite path. We are on the path to just get rid of this technology by penalizing it. And that really is it's a bad look for California. It's not it's not going to get us anywhere. Prices won't come down. We won't decarbonize, and the lights won't, frankly, stay on.
Absolutely true. So you have advocated for those solar owners right now that are concerned about these changes to net energy metering or their grandfather periods or sunsetting or what have you. I've heard you advocating a parallel, putting in sort of a parallel system or adding storage to your system and not even have any plan of exporting that, just using that on site. Is that right?
Yeah, you can do that now. It's called a non-export addition. So the basic idea is you could have a solar system that is net metered, and is sending electricity back to the grid, or you could have no net metered system, and you could just put a non-exporting system on your home or your business. And the basic idea is what you described. You build it exactly whatever size you want. It could be small or large, and you just never export. And your inverter is set up to never, and the battery is set up to never export a single electron to the grid. Which means once your battery's full and your solar is still generating electricity, that electricity gets essentially wasted. But most people that have this have it sized such that they are capturing their electrons in a battery for later use. And it's kind of like you're still tied to the grid for times when you need it late at night or in the dead of winter. But otherwise, you're a self-contained system. Now, the problem that we are facing with this setup is that the utilities are attaching a tax onto that. There's basically a grid access charge that they are attaching to these non-export systems. The charge is small right now, and we object to it. We don't think it's the right policy, but the utilities are right now getting away with charging it. And my concern is that they're going to just up that tax and make it to where the non-export systems are financially unviable, because they literally tax you based on the capacity of your system. So the bigger your solar system, even if it doesn't export, the bigger monthly tax you pay to the utility. And it's very wrong-headed of them that if you don't buy electricity from the utility, you don't owe them a single penny. And the CalSA's studies have shown that another kind of myth is this idea that has fueled the cost shift myth of solar being a problem, is this idea that people aren't paying their fair share of grid costs. What our data, CalSA requested data from the investor utilities in California, and they found that but the average customer that's on net metering in California pays $80 to $120 a month after going solar, net of any benefits from their solar system. They're still paying $80 to $120 a month, which is well in excess of what it costs to service them in the middle of the night when electricity is abundant. There isn't any stress on the grid. To become just a nighttime electricity user is actually a blessing. That's a good thing. It's again, Art Rosenfeld, we should reduce our daytime electricity usage. We should all be super efficient in the middle of the day, because that's when California gets into trouble on hot summer afternoons. So using electricity at night, it's like EV drivers, right? If you're on an EV rate, the utility is basically begging you to charge your car at night. Yep. It's because they have surplus electricity at night. They have no need. They have more than they need because they build the grid for the peak. They build the grid for the middle of the summer. So in the winter and at night, they have surplus. So a solar user is basically like an EV driver. They use more electricity at night, which is exactly when we want consumers to use it to kind of balance things out. So there's so much to this argument once you look under the hood, that you're like, this is so wrong that we are attacking these people and penalizing them with taxes and fees, and but nobody takes the time right now to really stop and listen and think about it critically.
Thanks so much for what you're doing. Obviously, the fight continues. The fight is so important. The logic of what you're talking about is so clear. but the vested interest of the utilities is equally clear. So, but thank you for what you're doing, educating us, my listeners, and thank you what you're doing at Environmental Working Group and what you've done at CALSA for all these years. And really appreciate your time on this podcast today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Ted. Thanks so much for having me.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanagan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.